Some of the views expressed on the Mormon Channel are solely for the education and inspiration of our audience and may not represent the official position of the Church.
You're listening to the Mormon Channel of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Welcome to Why I Believe. My name is Rick Starr. This is the first in a four-part series about the Mormon handcart historic sites in Wyoming. The sites include Martin's Cove, Willie's Sixth Crossing Center, and Rock Creek Hollow. I took my family to Martin's Cove to visit my parents, who are on a mission at the site. While there, we took a short handcart trek and stopped at a few of the stations and landmarks to hear stories about this historical and sacred place that is an integral part of our Mormon heritage. I invite you to come along on this short handcart trek with our family and hear the stories and feel the spirit of those pioneers who passed through this area. Before we began our family trek, we visited with my mother, Sister Starr, who gave us some background information about the Martin's Cove area. So right now we're standing on the actual trail that the Mormon pioneers traveled, the handcart pioneers, right?
Yes. All the handcart pioneers traveled through this. It's the Devil's Gate area, which was a landmark that they used as they traveled. And as they came through what is called Rattlesnake Pass. And there's a reason it's called Rattlesnake Pass. It's because there's rattlesnakes up in there. And it's a very rocky area, and so that's where the rattlesnakes hibernate. But the pioneers, the first three handcart companies that came through this area, came through with no problems. But the last two, the Martin and the Willie handcart companies, came very late and were caught in the early winter storms.
Now this path is also known as the Oregon Trail, isn't it?
The California, Oregon, and Pony Express Trail. Over 500,000 people traveled this trail. It was like an express highway for the day, and between 60 and 70,000 were Mormon pioneers.
How many of the Mormon pioneers that traveled this trail were in the Martin and Willie handcart companies?
There were about 1,000 altogether. There were a little over 500 in the Martin handcart company. Then there was the Hodgett and the Hunt wagon companies that came behind the two wagon companies. Then the Willie Company was about a week and a half to 2 weeks ahead of the Martin Company, and there were a little over 300 in that company. And so all four of those companies kind of traveled together and were helpful to each other. But the Willie Company went on ahead, and they were able to be rescued further ahead of the Martin Company.
So we often think of the Willie and Martin handcart companies as traveling together, but they were really separated by weeks sometimes, right?
Yes, the Willie Company left Iowa 10 days to 2 weeks before the Martin Company did. You need to realize that when these people got to Iowa City, there was nothing prepared for them. The handcarts were not prepared, the tents were not prepared. So this threw the Saints another 3 weeks behind because they had to build their own handcarts. They had to build their own tents before they could leave Iowa City.
And weren't they short on supplies as well to build everything and the supplies that they needed to take with them?
The supplies that they needed were mostly flour. In the earlier treks, the church stationed relief stations along the way so that the trek groups could replenish their supplies. But this late in the season, Salt Lake and Brigham Young did not realize that there were still people out on the trail. And so they were not replenishing. When they got to Fort Laramie, there was no flour for them to get. There was no meat for them to get. And so by the time they got to Red Buttes in Casper, they were very, very destitute. And their food supply went from a pound of flour a day down to 4 and 2 ounces of flour per day.
Basically cut to a quarter rations.
A quarter rations or less. And one of the things that they found was that the men were giving their food to their children because they couldn't stand to let their children go hungry. And so as they would go along, you're hearing handcarts in the background pulled by rovers. The men would travel all day helping to pull the hand carts. They would stay up all night guarding what little cattle they had. And then they would cut their rations to help feed their families. And that's why so many men were lost on the trail.
Wow, we drove about 330 miles to get here. And as we were driving under the full moon, you could see the high-range prairies just going on forever. And I tried to think to myself, what would it be like to be a pioneer pulling a handcart going, how far a day did they go? 10 miles, 20 miles?
10 to 15 miles a day usually, and usually when they got into those winter storms, then they had to wait for the storms to pass. So then they weren't able to make any headway at all.
I can imagine that some of them would have gotten pretty discouraged along the way.
Yes, I'm sure they got very discouraged, and if you read some of their histories, you read how as they got really, really discouraged and they were in freezing temperatures. They were many times up in Martin's Cove. It was 11 degrees below zero. And it was a very easy death for people to get discouraged and lay down and just go to sleep and not get up. And so they had to keep moving. One of the reasons that pioneers at the end of their day would build their fires and then they would sing and dance. And one of the reasons for that was to keep their spirits up. So music was very important.
As it still is today, one of the first buildings they built in Salt Lake was their social hall so that they could continue that tradition of music and song and dance and theater. And that really did prove to be great therapy for them as they were on the trail. It's really an amazing thing.
It did. And this is an amazing place. The last two handcart companies that came through here were not able to appreciate the beauty of this country because they were in dire circumstances. They were starving. They were cold. They were without clothing that would protect them. And so all they could see was snow, and they were fatigued, and they weren't able to complete and to enjoy the beauty of what was going on here in this high plains.
One of the things that this area is known for is Brigham Young was holding General Conference in Salt Lake, and he basically closed down General Conference to send rescue parties out to meet the saints who were stranded out here. And this was the area where many of them were rescued, isn't that correct?
The Martin Company, when they were in the blizzard up in the Casper, Wyoming area, it's called the Red Buttes area, there were 3 express riders that met them up there. And they came in and found them in dire circumstances. And as they found them, they said, "You've got to get up and get moving because there are wagons behind us that have everything that you need in order to survive." And so the handcart people got up and began moving. And as they came across the avenue of rocks and Prospect Hill, they finally reached Greasewood Creek where they met the wagons. And the wagons had clothing and food, and they had onions. Now we asked ourselves, why on earth would they bring onions? It was because they would last a long time, they were easy to eat, and those children took those onions and ate them just like apples. And from there, from Greasewood Creek, then they came on in to what was called Fort Seminole, which is the area that we're standing in now. And the fort never was a fort. It was a trading post, and it had been closed down. And they very soon realized that there was not room for all of these people, because between the Martin Company and the Hodgett and Hunt wagon companies, there were probably close to 800 people. And so the rescuers had been in this area before, and so they knew of this ravine, and so they took them up into the cove, because that was an area where they were protected from the winds and from the snow, and they were able to try and put their tents up and get a little protection. And that's what this area is noted for. Then when the Hunt and Hodgett wagon companies came in here, eventually it was determined by Captain Grant, who was one of the rescuers, that they needed to unload the wagons and put all of the things from those wagons into the fort. Now, the rescuers, many of them had planned on being gone from home for 2 weeks, and they asked some of these men to stay all winter long to guard these things that had been left. By doing this, they unloaded the wagon trains, and they were able to take the wagons up and move the Martin Company in wagons, the sick and the people who were ill. And so then, as we go along the trail today, we'll see the Sweetwater River, and Elder Starr will talk a little bit about the rescuers that helped get them across the river.
Okay, we're walking down the trail now, my family, and it's amazing that they allowed only 17 pounds per person to go on these hand carts, and they had to reduce that as they went. So they weren't really allowed very much to travel the hundreds of miles that they had to travel across the plains. Okay, we've stopped here at the first site. This is the Vale Crossing that crosses the Sweetwater Bridge, and there's a missionary here. And what is your name? I can't pronounce it, but I can tell you're probably from the Pacific somewhere.
My name is Elder Kaya Kamanu, and I'm from Rexburg, Idaho.
Okay, well, that's not the Pacific. But your name sounds like it's
Polynesian, and originally I'm from Hawaii.
Okay. You're a long way from Hawaii.
Yes, it is a long way.
But out here in this area, this is a lot like Rexburg, I would assume.
Yeah, pretty close. Except the wind blows a little harder, I think, here.
Oh, does it? Well, you're here at this crossing, the Vale Crossing. Can you tell us a little bit about the crossing and any stories about this area?
Yes, this crossing, they call it a Vale Crossing because once you cross the bridge, everything else on the other side of the bridge looks exactly the same as it was before when the pioneers came through this way. Nothing on that side has been done as far as plowing under the ground or anything. So it's still the same there. And this Vale Crossing, this bridge was put here in honor of those that crossed the river here in 1856 on that cold day.
So this was that area that happened?
This is not the exact area. We're not sure the exact spot where they crossed, but we're certain that it's about 2 miles downriver.
Oh, I see.
But not the exact spot.
But they've left, on the other side of this bridge, they've left everything intact as it was
Since
the pioneers.
Yes.
Yeah. Huh. Well, I like how you said that, in honor of, and that it seems like that would be a great way to honor their efforts as they cross the trail.
Yes, it is.
To leave it as it was.
Now there's another monument on the other side of the bridge, and that's a second crossing they talk about. And a lot of people, when they see that second crossing or second rescue, they ask the question, what is a second rescue? Well, the second rescue was when the Wyoming Riverton stake, when they did some genealogy, they found that most of the pioneers that came through here, their temple work weren't done. Mm-hmm. So that was a second rescue when they did all the temple work for the people in the handcart company came through. What they did was they had each member of the stake take one name and do the work for them.
A lot of these pioneers, they were traveling west so that they could get to Salt Lake to have their temple work done. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And like I say, it's ironic that nobody ever thought about the work not being done and not checking on it until President Lorimer. It's kind of a long story that he tells about how the work was done. And when he finally got the computers to work on with the genealogy, and he and his counselor were in the office with the computers, and they had all these computers set up, and his counselor says, well, give me a name. And President Lorimer gave him a name, which was Bodil Mortensen. And they typed her name in, and all the information came up, and they looked at her temple work, and it wasn't done. And then they took another name, James Kurtwood, and they typed his name in, everything came up, and his temple work wasn't done. And that's the reason why President Lorimer, he had this something eating inside of him saying, he says, something is happening, I don't know what it is. And that's what it was the temple work.
So those members had waited about 150 years for their work to be done.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah.
What are your thoughts as you've come to know these people and their history?
You know, my wife and I talked about that just the other day. That just the feeling of being here and knowing what the people went through when they came, and of the people that we got to know as we tell the stories, and we talk about how sacred this area is, and that's the feeling that we have. It's really a sacred area.
You're listening to Why I Believe on the Mormon channel of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Join us now as we continue our trek at Martin's Cove, one of the Mormon handcart historic sites of Wyoming. It's a beautiful morning here in Martin's Cove. Kind of warm. I can't imagine what it would be like in the early winter when the winds are blowing across these high plains and the snow and the cold. Okay, so we've just finished a little handcart trek of about a mile, just over a mile, and that was a lot of fun. How many miles did the handcart pioneers go with their handcarts?
It's 1,300 miles of walking from Iowa City to Salt Lake.
So they would have done 1,300 times what we just did.
Yeah, pretty close.
We're at the first handcart stop right now with Elder and Sister Ward from Colorado, and they're going to tell a story about a dog that happens to show up on the treks every year. Sister Ward.
Oscar the dog belongs to a ranch which is located about 15 miles from here. He's a Great Pyrenees. He's a large, very large dog, very, very sweet, very nice. Big white dog, fluffy. And every summer, as soon as he hears the square dance music, he shows up. He comes in to camp, and he pretty well hangs around here most of the summer. Most of the time, he picks up a trek group. For some reason, he'll choose a particular trek group, and he'll stay with them. He'll walk all the way back to the homestead with them, walk all the way back with them. He protects them. He barks and keeps the animals away. There's some amazing stories associated with Oscar. One story in particular that just happened a few weeks ago. We had a large family here that were here for a family reunion, a family from Arkansas, and they had a motorhome. The motorhome was parked in, of course, in the visitor center parking. And the father of the family came over to one of the missionaries and related the story, said, "What's up with this dog?" He didn't know the story about Oscar, and so he asked one of the missionaries, so they briefly told him. And he said the day before, his family had been at the visitor center. They'd been playing in the grass by the fort, and it was time to leave. So they all got up and piled into the motorhome, and all of a sudden Oscar appeared and laid down in front of the motorhome, and nothing that they did would make this dog move. So they're sitting there looking at, how are we going to leave? Because they couldn't pull out of the parking lot. Finally, the dad got out of the motorhome, walked around to see if he could encourage Oscar to leave, and all of a sudden, his youngest son came flying out of the bathroom, up the path, and jumped into the motorhome. And as soon as that happened, Oscar got up and left. And he said he knows they would have left his son behind if that dog hadn't been blocking the way for him.
So the dog gets to know the whole family, it sounds like.
It sounds like. He's very intuitive. He's very intuitive and very protective.
Didn't he protect some girl from rattlesnake? Sister Star?
These restrooms that we have here at handcart parking, the trekkers come through this area and they leave their handcarts in a parking area here, and then, of course, the girls go to the restroom, and the boys. Well, at one point, Oscar went and laid down in front of one of the girls' restrooms and would not move. Well, when they finally were able to pull the door open against him, there was a rattlesnake inside, and he had been protecting that area for the girls.
That's amazing. Elder Starr, my father, also has a story about Oscar the dog that happened here on the trail.
This is very short because he does this several times, but he'll adopt somebody on the trail, as my wife or Sister Ward had told you. And if he sees or senses a snake beside the trail, he will stop and bark at that location. and make sure that the kids don't go near it. And then once the kids move on, he does too.
That's great. He's like a little ministering angel here along the trail, guardian angel for the kids as they go on their treks. Okay, we've come up the trail a little bit, and we're in an area where there's 3 statues, and my father's going to tell a little bit about what these 3 statues honor and represent.
These 3 statues, there's 2 men involved here in the center one, originally were a memorial to the boys from the Salt Lake Valley that came to help rescue this group of people that ended up over in Martin's Cove. Now, there are several things about this. First of all, it was dedicated on November 4th, 2006. And that's an important date because it's exactly 150 years from the actual occurrence at that time. So the first presidency came up here in the middle of a winter, very cold situation, to dedicate these statues. And there's a direct connection between the one here on the far left. His great-great-grandson modeled that for him. That's Kimball. And you can see he's got an infant. He's also got a toddler in his arms. Now, what they're memorializing here is the crossing of the Sweetwater to go up to Martin's Cove. And it was important that they cross this Sweetwater River to get up to the cove where there was better protection from the weather. And when the people saw the river and realized they had to cross it, they just shrank down in fear. Started to cry, many of them, because they remembered not too long in the past a crossing of the North Platte. And on the North Platte, there were 13 or 14, depending on who you listen to, people that died as a result of exposure while they were crossing that river. And they were afraid the same thing was going to happen here. Well, these boys just took it on their own volition. They didn't have to form a committee. They didn't have to be asked. They just got in the river and started carrying people across. And so it is an important memorial to those boys. Now, the history department has proven that there's at least one other man, probably more. His name is Ira Nebeker. And so they've proven that there were probably 5. Now, the sculptor on these things is Rusty Bowles from Arizona. He's a state senator there. And since that has been discovered, now he looks at it this way, and I agree with him. It is really a memorial to the Aaronic priesthood, because these boys didn't have to be asked. They didn't have to form a committee. They didn't have to do anything on it. They just did it on their own. They saw a need and did it. And that's what the Aaronic priesthood should be about.
This Martin's Cove area was kind of an area that was protected. There's a cove here where the pioneers could be protected a little bit from the wind, but it is a beautiful place here in the high plains. We're now actually in the Martin Cove area, which we had to come back on a trail to get back here. And I think they usually have hundreds of trekkers come back here at a time. We're with Elder and Sister Payne. And where are you from?
We're from Lethbridge, Alberta, in Canada.
Oh, wonderful. So are you enjoying your time here at Martin's Cove?
This has been the most spiritual time in our whole life, I'm sure. I've had spiritual experiences, but this is like daily shedding a tear or two because of the Spirit touches my heart, and I know that the people that came through here suffered greatly, and the Lord blessed them all the way through.
Tell us some of the stories that you might share with the trekkers who come through.
Well, there's Peter McBride. He was 6 years old when he left Iowa City. As he came here before he got up here to the Martin's Cove, somebody gave him an old ox bone. He skinned it off, and he took the bone and he put it in a pot, and he boiled it up, or he actually roasted it, and then he was going to boil it up. But before it got done in the fire, roasting, some older boys came along and took the bone away from him. So what he did is he took the hide that he skinned off the bone, and he cut it in strips, and he put it in the pot and boiled that up. and he drank the broth. As you may not realize, but they were down to 2 ounces of flour. He had a younger sister that was 3 years old, and Peter was only 6. But they found good nourishment out of that broth that they had. They also, that night when they got here, of course the wind was blowing so bad and hard that it blew their tents down, and Peter was under the one tent, and the rest of the family left and got shelter in somebody else's tent, but Peter stayed the night under the tent. The next morning, the men, as they normally would do, they'd go around from tent to tent and find out who was dead, and they would gather up those that had passed away during the night. And they came to this tent that Peter was under, and they says, "Is there anybody under this tent?" And his older sister had said that Peter hadn't come out of the tent, and so maybe he's froze to death under the tent. Well, the men shook the snow off the tent, and here Peter crawled out, and he said he actually had a nice warm sleep that night. It was probably because of the snow that had covered him during the night and sheltered him.
Yeah, so his body heat kept him warm within the tent. Sister Payne, do you have any stories you'd like to share? Your favorite pioneer stories here on the Cove?
Okay, I'll tell you about Amy Loader. Amy and her family, there was 6 children and her husband James, and they left England in 1855. When they got here, they joined with the handcart companies to come across. Now, as they progressed along, James got ill and he was unable to pull the handcart all the time, which left the responsibility then to Amy and her older girls to pull the handcart and to take care of the family. Occasionally James felt better and he would help, but most of the time he was too ill and would ride along in the handcart. He did die on the trail before they hit Nebraska, which left then Amy and her children. They were traveling with a married daughter and her family, and they continued on along the trail. When they got to the North Platte River, they were trying to cross, and she was worried because she had no one to help her, and she would call for people to help her daughters to get across on the North Platte. They all made it across. They made it up here to Martin's Cove, but they were all, of course, on starvation rations and cold and freezing, and she wanted her girls to help her make a fire because she could see that they needed to do this to get warm. And as she asked them, Patience and Tamar and Maria, to get up and make a fire, they all said no, they wouldn't get up. They didn't feel well. They were cold and tired. So she got up and started to dance. And she danced around, and then she fell. And when she fell, all her daughters got up and ran to her aid. And Amy started laughing, and they realized that she had fallen on purpose to get them to get up. And that's probably what saved their lives. She got them up, got them moving, and built a fire to warm them all. And they continued on. She became the strength. She was of frail health when she was in England, but she was the strength that got the family through all the way to Salt Lake.
You've been listening to Episode 1 of a series on the Mormon handcart historic sites of Wyoming. Please join us for Episode 2 of this 4-part series to hear more handcart stories and to learn about the Sun family who owned the ranch where Martin's Cove is located. You can download and listen to this and other episodes of Why I Believe by visiting mormonchannel.org/programs. Scroll down and select Why I Believe. Thanks for listening.